Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a 20-year-old student from a small town who loves exploring new places. This year, I decided to take a big leap and join an exchange program in Japan. It's my first time traveling so far from home, and while I was excited to immerse myself in a new culture, I had no idea how challenging it would be to navigate the traditions and expectations of my host family. This is the story of my journey filled with mistakes, laughter, and lessons I'll never forget. I stepped off the plane, my heart racing with excitement and a hint of fear. The cool air of Tokyo's airport hit my face as I walked through the terminal. Everything around me felt new and overwhelming. Signs and Japanese characters filled the walls, and the hum of people speaking a language I didn't fully understand buzzed in my ears. As I pulled my suitcase along, I spotted a small sign that read, "Welcome, Sarah," in neat handwriting. A middle-aged man and woman stood behind it, smiling politely. Beside them, a girl about my age waved enthusiastically. "You must be Sarah," the man said in a deep, calm voice. His English was clear but formal. "Yes, that's me." "Thank you for meeting me," I replied, my voice shaking slightly. The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Tanaka, bowed deeply. I quickly copied her, but I wasn't sure if I did it right. The girl, Yumi, stepped forward, grinning. "Hi, I'm Yumi. I'll help you with everything," she said cheerfully, grabbing my suitcase. As we walked to their car, I couldn't help but notice the smells of the airport freshly brewed coffee, faint hints of fish from nearby restaurants, and the sterile, metallic scent of the air conditioning. Everything felt so different from home. The ride to their house was quiet at first. I stared out of the window, mesmerized by the neon lights, the orderly traffic, and the compact buildings. Yumi broke the silence. "So, do you like Japan so far?" she asked. "It's amazing," I said, smiling. "Everything is so clean and organized, and the signs, they're beautiful, but I can't read them yet." "Don't worry, you'll learn," she said confidently. When we arrived at their home, I was greeted by a small, tidy house with a traditional wooden gate. As soon as I stepped inside, Yumi whispered, "Shoes off." I quickly kicked off my sneakers, feeling embarrassed for almost forgetting. The house smelled of cedar wood and something delicious, maybe miso soup. The floor was smooth under my socks, and the warm lighting made everything feel cozy. "This is your room," Mrs. Tanaka said, sliding open a paper door. Inside, there was a futon neatly laid out on the tatami mat floor and a low table with a teapot. "It's perfect." "Thank you," I said, trying to hold back my nervousness. "Dinner is ready," she added, motioning for me to follow her. At the dinner table, I saw small dishes arranged carefully. Yumi handed me chopsticks, and I hesitated. "Do you know how to use these?" she asked, giggling. "Not really," I admitted, feeling my cheeks flush. She leaned closer, showing me how to hold them. It felt awkward, but I managed to pick up a piece of sushi. The taste was incredible, fresh and slightly tangy. "Good job." Yumi cheered as I successfully ate my first bite. The Tanaka family chatted softly in Japanese as I focused on not dropping my food. Even though I couldn't understand them, their laughter and gentle tones made me feel welcomed. That night, as I lay on the futon, the soft rustle of the wind outside lulled me to sleep. My heart was full of gratitude and a little fear. This was just the beginning of my journey, and I knew it wouldn't be easy. When I woke up, the room was filled with soft sunlight streaming through the paper windows. The faint sound of birds chirping outside was soothing, and for a moment I felt completely at peace. Then it hit me. I was in Japan, living with a new family. My stomach fluttered with nervous excitement. I got dressed quickly, trying to remember what Mrs. Tanaka had said about keeping the room tidy. I folded the futon as neatly as I could, though it still looked a little uneven. In the hallway, I saw Yumi waiting for me. "Good morning, Sarah," she said, smiling brightly. "Good morning," I replied, trying to match her energy. As I followed her to the kitchen, she stopped suddenly and pointed to my feet. "Shoes," she said, giggling. I looked down and realized I had forgotten to put on the house slippers. "Oops, sorry," I said, quickly slipping them on. She laughed and said, "You'll get used to it. Breakfast was already on the table." It was nothing like the cereal or toast I had back home. There were small bowls of rice, miso soup, and what looked like grilled fish. The aroma was unfamiliar but pleasant. "Come sit," Mrs. Tanaka said, motioning to a spot at the low table. I hesitated for a moment before sitting cross-legged. The table was so close to the floor, and I felt awkward trying to balance myself. As we began eating, I realized I had a problem chopsticks. Everyone else was using them with ease, but I could barely hold them properly. I fumbled, dropping a piece of fish back onto my plate. Yumi noticed and leaned over. "Do you need help with the chopsticks?" she asked, smiling. "Yes, please." "It's harder than I thought," I replied, laughing nervously. She took her own chopsticks and showed me slowly. "Hold them like this, see? Then move just the top one." I tried to copy her, and after a few failed attempts, I managed to pick up a piece of rice. "You did it," Yumi cheered, clapping her hands. I felt a small surge of pride. The family watched me with kind expressions, though I noticed Mr. Tanaka was quieter than the others. I wondered if he was judging me for being so clumsy. Throughout the day, I noticed other small cultural differences. Every time someone entered a room, they bowed slightly. At first, I forgot to bow back, but Yumi would nudge me as a reminder. In the afternoon, Yumi showed me around the house. The walls were thin, and I could hear the faint sound of Mrs. Tanaka talking on the phone in the other room. Everything was so organized and clean, from the neatly folded towels to the perfectly aligned shoes by the door. "Why do you have so many slippers?" I asked, pointing to the rows of them near the entrance. "Different slippers for different places," Yumi explained. "These are for the bathroom, and these are for outside." "Oh, I see," I said, though it seemed complicated to me. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, I tried using the chopsticks again. I wasn't perfect, but I managed to eat without dropping anything. "You're getting better," Yumi said with a grin. "Thanks, I'm trying," I replied, smiling back. As I observed the family, I realized how different their habits were from mine. They spoke softly, moved carefully, and always seemed so respectful of their surroundings. I didn't fully understand the meaning behind their actions, but I knew there was more to learn. That night, lying on my futon, I felt a mix of emotions. I was happy to be here, but I also felt overwhelmed. Would I ever fully understand this new culture? The day of the formal dinner arrived, and I was both excited and nervous. Mrs. Tanaka had been preparing for it all afternoon, the house filled with the aroma of freshly cooked dishes. Yumi explained that some family friends would join us, making it a more traditional and important occasion. I stood in front of the small mirror in my room, adjusting the blouse I had chosen for the dinner. It was simple, but I hoped it looked respectful enough. When I entered the dining area, the low table was beautifully set. Small dishes of colorful food were arranged with precision, each one looking like a tiny work of art. The guests arrived soon after a middle-aged couple who greeted me with warm smiles and polite bows. I did my best to bow back properly. We all sat around the table, and the atmosphere felt formal but welcoming. As the dinner began, I felt more confident with the chopsticks. I managed to pick up pieces of sashimi and small vegetables without dropping anything. I even joined in the polite conversation, feeling like I was finally blending in. But then it happened. I was gesturing with my chopsticks while speaking, something I often did with a fork at home. Without thinking, I pointed them toward Mr. Tanaka while trying to ask him about one of the dishes. "Mr. Tanaka, what is this one called?" I said, holding the chopsticks in his direction. The room fell silent. The warm chatter stopped, and an awkward tension filled the air. Mr. Tanaka's face stiffened slightly. Though he tried to maintain a polite expression, Mrs. Tanaka glanced at her husband and Yumi's eyes widened. Confused, I looked around the table. Is everything okay? I asked, my voice breaking the silence. The family exchanged glances, the kind that said more than words ever could. I felt my chest tighten, unsure of what was happening. Finally, Mrs. Tanaka spoke, her tone gentle but serious. Maybe Sarah doesn't know the custom, she said, looking at me kindly. I set the chopsticks down immediately, my face burning with embarrassment. I'm sorry, what did I do wrong? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. In Japan, she explained softly, pointing with chopsticks is considered very rude. It's disrespectful, especially toward someone older or of higher status. I felt my stomach drop. I hadn't meant to offend anyone, but I could see the discomfort on Mr. Tanaka's face. I didn't know. I'm so sorry, I stammered, looking at him directly. Mr. Tanaka gave a small nod, acknowledging my apology, but still looking distant. The dinner resumed, but the lively atmosphere from before was gone. I felt every second of the silence, every polite but strained smile. When the meal finally ended, I excused myself and went back to my room. Sitting on the edge of my futon, I replayed the moment in my head. My chest felt heavy and tears stemmed my eyes. I had tried so hard to fit in, but one small mistake had created such tension. That night, I sat in my room, staring at the ceiling. The quiet of the house seemed louder than usual, and the tension from the dinner still lingered in the air. I felt a knot in my stomach, heavy with regret and uncertainty. A soft knock at the door broke my thoughts. Sarah, can I come in? Yumi's voice called gently. Yes, of course, I replied, sitting up quickly. She slid the door open and stepped inside, holding 2 small cups of tea. I thought you might need this, she said with a kind smile, handing me a cup. Thank you, I said, taking a sip. The warm tea was soothing, but I could tell from Yumi's expression that she had more to say. She sat down cross-legged across from me, placing her cup on the floor. Sarah, she began hesitantly, about tonight. I felt my face flush again as I remembered the awkward silence at the dinner table. I know I did something wrong, I said quickly, but I don't fully understand what happened. Yumi gave me a sympathetic look and explained, in Japan, pointing with chopsticks is rude. It's like pointing a finger at someone, but worse. My father felt upset because it's seen as very disrespectful, especially to someone older like him. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I hadn't meant to offend anyone, but my lack of cultural knowledge had caused this. Oh no. I didn't know. I'm so sorry, I said, my voice trembling. I would never want to disrespect him. Yumi placed a reassuring hand on mine. I know you didn't mean it. My mother understands that too, but my father, he's more traditional. It might take him some time to feel comfortable again. I bit my lip, feeling tears prick the corners of my eyes. I feel terrible. I don't know how to make it right, I admitted. Yumi tilted her head thoughtfully. Maybe you could apologize to him in a way that shows you respect his culture. Something meaningful. Her suggestion gave me a glimmer of hope, but also made me nervous. Do you think he'll forgive me? I asked. I think he will, she said with a small smile. It's not about being perfect, Sarah. It's about showing effort. I nodded, feeling a mix of determination and anxiety. I didn't know exactly what I would do, but I was sure of one thing. I needed to fix this. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with ideas. I wanted to apologize in a way that would show Mr. Tanaka how much I respected him and their culture. I didn't know how, but I promised myself I would find a way. The next morning, I woke up determined to make things right. After breakfast, I nervously approached Mrs. Tanaka in the kitchen. Mrs. Tanaka, could you help me? I asked hesitantly. She turned to me with a curious but kind smile. Of course, Sarah. What do you need? I explained my plan. I wanted to apologize to Mr. Tanaka in Japanese during an upcoming neighborhood dinner they had mentioned. I thought it would show him how much I respected their culture. Her face lit up with approval. That is a good idea, she said. It will show sincerity. We spent hours practicing a short apology in Japanese. My tongue tripped over the unfamiliar sounds, and sometimes Mrs. Tanaka had to hold back laughter at my attempts. Sarah, you're improving, she said gently, though I still felt far from confident. By the evening of the dinner, my stomach was in knots. The Tanakas and I walked to a nearby community hall, where the tables were already set with beautiful dishes. Neighbors greeted me warmly, bowing as they introduced themselves. I did my best to bow back, though it felt awkward. As everyone sat down, I could feel the weight of the moment approaching. My hands were clammy, and I kept replaying the words in my head. I glanced at Yumi, who gave me an encouraging nod. When the time came, I stood up nervously, holding my hands together in front of me. The room fell silent, and dozens of eyes turned toward me. Excuse me, I began in English. I wanted to say something to Mr. Tanaka. I switched to Japanese, carefully pronouncing the words Mrs. Tanaka had taught me. Watashi wa gomenasai desu. The room erupted in laughter. My heart sank, and I felt my face burn with embarrassment. What had I done wrong? I turned to Yumi, panicking. What happened? What did I say? I whispered. Yumi was laughing so hard she could barely speak. Sarah, you said, I am delicious, instead of I am sorry. She finally managed to explain. I stared at her, horrified, and then, to my surprise, I started laughing too. It was so ridiculous that I couldn't help but join in. When the laughter subsided, I turned back to Mr. Tanaka, my voice trembling. I wanted to say I'm sorry, I said nervously. I really respect your culture, and I'm trying to learn. Mr. Tanaka's expression softened. For the first time, I saw a small smile on his face. Effort is important, he said simply, his English slow but clear. The neighbors clapped, and Mrs. Tanaka leaned over to me. You did well, Sarah. Mistakes are part of learning. Despite the error, I felt a sense of relief. The laughter had broken the tension, and I could tell that my efforts were appreciated. That night, as we walked home, Yumi teased me about my mistake. So, Sarah, are you delicious? She joked, giggling. Only sometimes, I replied with a grin. For the first time since I arrived, I felt like I truly belonged. The next morning, the house felt lighter, as if the tension from the past few days had lifted. At breakfast, Mr. Tanaka greeted me with a small but genuine smile, something I hadn't seen before. It felt like a quiet acknowledgement, and I couldn't help but smile back. As we sat down to eat, Mrs. Tanaka served the rice, and Yumi passed me a small plate of pickled vegetables. I thanked them in Japanese, still practicing my pronunciation. Arigato gozaimasu, I said softly, hoping I got it right. Mr. Tanaka looked up from his bowl and spoke for the first time in a tone that felt warm. You tried, and that is what matters, he said. His English was slow but deliberate, and I could tell he meant it. His words hit me deeply. I had been so worried about being perfect, about not making mistakes, that I hadn't realized the effort was what truly counted. Thank you for teaching me, I said, my voice filled with gratitude. I still have a lot to learn. Mr. Tanaka nodded, his small smile remaining. Learning takes time, he said simply. Over the next few days, I noticed subtle changes in my relationship with the family. Mrs. Tanaka seemed more relaxed around me, often offering to show me how to prepare traditional dishes. Yumi became my biggest cheerleader, constantly teaching me new phrases and laughing at my pronunciation mishaps. One afternoon, while helping Yumi hang laundry in the garden, she turned to me and said, You know, my father respects you now. Really? I asked, surprised. She nodded. He's traditional, but he sees how hard you're trying. That's important to him. I felt a warmth in my chest, a sense of belonging I hadn't felt before. That evening, as I helped Mrs. Tanaka clear the dinner table, I looked around at the family. They were chatting softly, their voices blending with the rhythmic chirping of cicadas outside. It struck me how much I had already learned, not just about their culture, but about patience, understanding, and the importance of humility. Mistakes were no longer something to fear. They were part of the journey. Before bed, I sat on my futon and wrote in my journal. Today, I realized that adapting to a new culture isn't about being perfect. It's about showing respect, making an effort, and being open to learning from those around you. This family has taught me so much already, and I can't wait to see what else is ahead. As I closed my journal and turned off the light, I felt at peace. I wasn't just a guest in this house anymore. I was becoming part of their story, and they were becoming part of mine.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to learn more English through real-life experiences, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Hit the like button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Let's keep learning and growing together. See you in the next video.